Tonight. I have a couple of questions for you relating to your involvement with First Church of Salt Lake City, a Unitarian church. Curious to know, how did you get involved with the church? What brought you to it? Phil?
So I have to actually probably step back a
Fine.
step. So we were in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Nancy became pregnant, or we became pregnant, however you want to put that. I didn't really become pregnant, but Nancy really became pregnant. And so we both grew up Catholic, and we had drifted away from that religion, and didn't feel like we had much need for religion. But actually, once Nancy became pregnant, we started thinking, boy, maybe we really need to think about a larger community for our family that we could try to fit in going forward. And so we're in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We grew up Catholic. So first church we went to, Catholic church, and we went, and neither of us were very happy about going, I don't think. But we thought, well, we needed to give it a try, so we needed to go for a few times. Mm-hmm. And so we went, and the funny thing, of course, now I feel like in hindsight, was that is that we both were doing the same thing, but we hadn't really talked about it with each other. And what we were doing was we decided not to say anything anymore that we didn't believe in, and we realized we were sitting there not saying anything anymore. And finally one day we both said, "This is what we're doing.
This is what I'm doing.
I'm not saying things I don't believe in." And you're like, "I'm not saying things I don't believe in." And we realized we didn't say anything during the creed. We didn't say, I mean, I grew up in a very Catholic family, and I was an altar boy, and so I knew most of the prayers of the ordinary service, actually, because I would sit there at one point in my life, and I would turn the pages of the prayer book, basically, that the priest was reading out of to do the ordinary prayers. So, but I just realized in the end, I was just standing there silent, or I would stand up, sit down, whatever, do what the motion was, but, and we realized that we were both doing that, and so it became, well, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is just silly, right? It's silly for us to be going, we don't believe this, we're not finding that it's inspirational or provides us any kind of aspirational kinds of goals or anything like that. And so we decided we kind of needed to start see if there's a different community that we could belong to. And so that's kind of what we did. We jumped around to a few different communities in Kalamazoo, just trying to check some out.
But really, I think I had a colleague who I was talking with about this, and she happened to be Jewish, and she's like, there's this church that anybody can go to, and we're like, okay, we'll check it out. So we went, and it kind of blew our minds a little.
Okay.
This is just so different.
So it blew your mind.
Well, this is so different than Catholic church, right? Because it's like people are sitting there talking about stuff that's contemporaneous. It wasn't trying to talk about ancient history, kind of, and actually trying to apply what they're talking about to our lives today. And
it felt like there was really no ritual to it.
Yeah,
that's what it felt like to us.
To us, coming from
like,
Catholic, where you
sit,
and you stand and you kneel at different times, right? And you do that in a particular order. Mm-hmm. And so that was pretty crazy and wild to us, I guess. And then so we kind of joined that church. And the interesting thing about that church at that time, I just have to say one more thing about that still before we come to Salt Lake, is that their minister had recently left, and so they had an interim minister when we were going there. And that was actually a great time to go to a Unitarian church if you're church shopping in a way, because the interim minister's job is to actually try to help the congregation figure out what they want and where they need to be and where they want to go. Mm-hmm. And so to do that, they talked about a lot of history and a lot, about Unitarian history, and also about, where they wanted to go with stuff. And and then Nathan came along, our oldest, and the church just loved him because there was barely any kids in that church either. And so everybody was really accepting. And so it was just a very warm and accepting environment. And we joined while we were there, even though we were there for a fairly short period of time. And so then, so I was doing a postdoc at Upjohn, which became pharmacy at Upjohn while we were there. And so, but I wasn't quite finished with the work on it. And so my boss had moved out here to Salt Lake to come to Huntsman Cancer Institute. And he asked if I would come and try to finish. And we thought, well, we may as well, right?
We'll go for a couple
We'll
years.
go. It's, and so that's exactly what we did. We came out, and then of course for us, then the thing to do was to actually try to find a Unitarian church, because we weren't going to look for another one.
So what year did you come to Salt Lake City?
1997. And so we checked out both South Valley and First Church, and we kind of liked First Church. It fit better we felt like our personalities, I guess, in a general sense. Not to say that there weren't things that we thought were very odd about First Church when we got there.
What was odd about it?
Well, the oddest thing was that it's comparatively, so even though People's Church in Kalamazoo, they did have a place where you could bring your baby and stuff like that. But, they were very welcoming of having kids in the service. Nathan was with us as much as he was in the preschool. And it wasn't any big deal, but it was just weird when we first came to First Church, and it's like, there's like no kids in here, and it really felt like there was a big barrier to that from our perspective. That it wasn't acceptable to have kids in there, and I think, so if I can say one more thing, and then I'll let you. But I think it's actually.
Can I speak?
Yeah. But I think it's actually one of the things that drove us into the RE program, right? Because. So we come with one child, another one was not quite on the way yet, but almost, and so we took our kids into the back, or Nathan into the back. Then we met Joan Gregory because she had Brian, they're same age, and so that was kind of how we started meeting people. We met people through going to RE mainly. That's because then we would go, and we signed up very soon to become part of the RE program, because we thought, well, I guess we recognize that part of the deal with RE is that if you have kids in it, it's a good thing for you to contribute to actually make sure that this program continues and does what you hope that it does.
Well, that's a great transition. So Nancy, you have a couple of years of involvement with RE at First Church, and talk to us about that transition that Phil was alluding to.
So we started out just being involved basically in our kids' classes for many, many years. So I think we taught every
we taught for almost 10 years straight.
Was there an actual curriculum, or were you working at developing as you went along?
Most of the time there was a curriculum, I would say. But we did a lot of stuff. We had a really hard time sticking to what was on the paper, and we usually changed it quite a bit. And we liked to bring in media. So at that time, we didn't have Apple TVs and all of these things, so we would bring in the big clunky TV, or else, we had a projector. We'd bring in a projector and run things off of that. And so we tried to make a lot of changes, because I felt like the curriculum was so clearly from the 1970s and it needed a little bit of an update. But there was a lot of really good material there. And really, I think teaching in RE taught us so much about the Unitarian faith.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Since we were pretty new to it, and in fact, I think one of the experiences I most remember about Michigan when we were there is we had met the minister the first day or so, and he called later in the week and said, "I'd like to come over and meet you." And I was like,
"This is weird."
Catholics don't do that.
I've never had a priest call us up and invite himself over.
We were very I said okay, but I think we were really nervous that he was some kind of Mormon. And then we moved to Utah. So anyway, but then he came and he taught us something about the history of the church, and we're just like, I can't believe this is real. It just doesn't seem like any church could really be open to everybody. But I think as we went on and continued to come and came to Salt Lake and listened to Tom's sermons and met so many people through the church, I think we have met a lot of people who come from very different backgrounds and very different belief systems. And so I think I found out that it was kind of true.
So how did you distill that down to the level of young children, junior high age, even high school age? The new set of values, the new sensibility to the world at large. How did you bring that to the kids?
I kind of think that it's a universal thing, that we're trying to teach people to care about each other, to respect each other, to take responsibility for what they're doing. And, I think all of those things are part of what the principles of Unitarian Universalism is. And I think that's what we always wanted to put out there.
I think that we spent a lot of time on principles in RE, especially for the younger kids, right? And so I think it's just, so it's kind of repeating those things over and over again on the one hand, but also never telling them what is the right thing to do, right? I mean, always kind of leaving it open at the end so that was never a dictatorial thing from above, that this is how you're supposed to behave.
And therein lies the key difference between
Catholicism, at least. Well, most religions
and Unitarian religion.
Yeah.
Any special events during your time working in RE at First Church that come to mind? Any dates of special events?
Well, for us personally, when our daughter was born, which was in 1999, Sylvia was one of the ministers at that church. And
Sylvia Barrand.
Yes, and so she came to the hospital when I was still in the hospital. I wasn't there very long, but she
we tried to get her out of the hospital quick. That's a different story.
She came and blessed her in the hospital for us, and that was just so meaningful to me, because we hadn't been members very long, only a year and a half or so that we'd even been there. And she made this big effort to come, and I'll never forget it, because her question to us was, what do you want for your child? What do you want for your daughter? And I said, I want her to be a strong, independent young lady. And she looks at me and she says, are you sure? And I was, just had a baby. I was not thinking properly. I'm like, well, yeah. But many years later, I realized why she said that, because it creates its own challenges. But that was a pretty special time that I will always remember personally. We also really enjoyed, she used to do an intergenerational service that was in between the 9 and 11 o'clock services. And our family loved that, because the kids would get up. Every kid that wanted to say something special that happened in their lives that week would come up, and they'd go up and go, I lost a tooth, and they were so excited to have lost a tooth. And Sylvia would be like, oh, yay, that's so great. So that was really special to us when our kids were little.
Yeah, certainly when our kids were little, I think that was another major way of meeting people, is just meeting the other parents, right? Mm-hmm. Because kind of the parents would kind of just hang out a little bit and chit-chat a little bit kind of during the service to some extent, where Sylvia would mainly be interacting with the kids, and it was her interactions with the kids that were really great, actually. We were thinking about what were these early things in the church that were kind of eventful for us, and some of those early events were things that kind of Sylvia was really the one that drove many of those events, and so Nathan was an unusual child in many ways, but one way was that he actually played the accordion. That was his instrument of choice after a while, right? So he was 8 or 9 or whatever. I mean, one day, we brought his accordion to church. I don't remember why, but he's sitting there playing the accordion during the intergenerational service, was, kind of riffing with Sylvia. It was the most hilarious thing, we were just laughing the whole time.
Did you happen to get any photos?
We
were just talking about that.
We have to see
somewhere
if
we might have
there's
some.
got to be some, because that was so hilarious. But and then things like the pageants when the kids were little too were big deals, right? And so both of us were remembering Bethany as an angel, and she was such an angel. We felt like she was such an angel, but and she was so precious as a little angel, right, in the pageants. And so those were things that that basically built community, right? It made us feel like this was a welcoming community and a good thing. So as opposed to what I kind of said earlier, where I felt like there was a little bit of a wall for if you're coming in with kids. I mean, this was the counter to that, right? And I think that there's now a different counter to that. But that we don't have those intergenerational services anymore and stuff like that. But that was a way, I think, of actually making young families feel welcome. And
So this interview is being conducted in the fall of 2018, right now.
Yeah.
But we would hope that the material that we are recording now will be viewed by people over the next 10, 20, and possibly even more years. What would you tell folks in the future about being a member of First Church? What stands out for you?
Well, I still think that I feel like a lot of the engagement I've done a number of things in the church, from being on the board and everything else, but I actually feel like a lot of the most impactful things were working with youth. And actually I feel like the coming of age program is really a stellar program, and I haven't taught that maybe as much as others have, but I did teach it for a number of years. And I also think the Our Whole Lives program these are cornerstones, I feel like, in our religious education program, in terms of trying to help people, these young people actually, learn who they are and figure out who they are. During
some difficult years, teen years, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, and while, of course, we did like almost every grade, because we would jump back and forth between our kids and stuff like that. But I certainly enjoyed, and we've done more teaching of junior high on, if you will. I think I enjoy that more, because the kids are able to think more independently and stuff like that too. And so it's fun to try to challenge them and just get them to talk about why they think what they think. They recognize that, they're just at the cusp of starting to really think what they think most of the time, right? And so I think those have been some of the deeper
aspects of
me,
your involvement with the church.
I think for me, part of it has been being involved in running the RE program and helping those youth to connect with opportunities for service, and through the coming of age program to help them learn something about their church and where they come from. I was really active in planning the trips that they took, the mission trips, and we changed them to service trips.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about these trips, destinations.
So these were for high school kids, and they went to all kinds of places and did all kinds of different service. But I think the most meaningful ones to my children and were probably the ones down to the Navajo reservation and up to the other reservation when Matthew took them just a couple years ago. They see a lifestyle that they have no familiarity with, and I think it really opened their eyes to seeing that the world is not just our little cushy little upper middle class white world that we live in. So I think that was really important. For my son, they did a trip to San Francisco where they went to work with homeless populations, and he's a computer geek, and he actually, at one of the food banks one day when they were serving a meal. They were encouraged to sit down and talk with people, and he met this gentleman who was a computer programmer, and it just really was impactful on him because he's like, wow, if someone who's a computer programmer can end up homeless, anybody can. And so it really taught empathy. So to me, those are some of the most important things we do in this church. Is
the high school service trips are
those high schools.
important.
Mm-hmm.
So you would say that these kinds of programs have relevance not only for you personally, but also going into the future for families that are looking for some sort of moral or ethical guidance or similar experiences that they might not have on their own.
Absolutely. Because I do think the Unitarian Church as a whole tends to be fairly wealthy and fairly homogeneous, I might say. And I think that it's just so important to give them experiences where they're out there in the world. And they're actually doing something too. They're not just trying to preach the Unitarian gospel. They're out there doing something and helping people.
That was one of the things actually when our daughter actually went on both the trips to the Navajo and then to
Lakota.
Yeah, it's the Lakota reservation in
Pine
Ridge. Thank you. There we go. I was like pine, but I couldn't. I was thinking prairie, but that wasn't quite right either. Anyway, so but Pine Ridge, and I think that actually there's lots of churches that go up to Pine Ridge. I mean, it's the poorest zip code in the nation. There's a lot of things associated with that, right? And so there's a lot of Christians that go there, and I think that people were surprised and maybe found it a little refreshing. These Unitarian kids were coming up just to help, and we weren't trying to teach them anything. They were trying to learn and just help out if there's something they could help out with, right? And so I think that is actually important for the youth to see as well, that you can do service for service's sake and not because you have some other agenda kind of behind your well-meaningness.
Okay. What I would like you to do
Please.
is pose a couple of the questions that you did there. And I'm simply going to video you from the back, and we'll insert those
Okay.
at appropriate times. So if you can pull out a couple of questions
Sure.
and ask them.
Let me just get back to that.
And are we trying to repeat things?
No,
Okay.
I'm just going to get his questions.
Okay.
Good, because I don't know that I
Tell
can.
me,
I don't know that I
tell
can
me when to go.
Go ahead.
Well, Nancy and Phil, thanks for joining us here this evening in the fall of 2018. I wonder what attracted you in the first place to the Unitarian Church, and when did you actually become members?
Okay, question 2.
Okay.
Or any other question?
I'm interested in getting to know a little bit more about your progression from getting acquainted to the church to becoming involved with religious education.
And just one more anywhere in there.
Wondered if you could recall any particular events, any dates that stand out in your memory of all the years that you've served the First Church of Salt Lake City.
Good. Okay. As for the idea of going through it a second time, I don't think we need to. I think that, this is just one of those freewheeling things that worked very well.
It's exactly as I anticipated it would be.
Because I thought maybe you had 3 or 4 set questions and we just boom, boom right through them and then go back and do it again. But this was much more meaningful.
But we rambled a
But
little.
but I can't shut up. So
There were, it's really
Truth of the
neat.
matter.
What I think was really neat about the interview was there was quite a bit of amusement between you two in recollecting this progression from Kalamazoo to Salt Lake City. And even though we went maybe half an hour.
Yeah.
There were nuggets in there nuggets in there that definitely went to my questions, and on a larger scale, I think go to the project that we're doing. In listening, for example, to the interview with, remind me the lawyer's name.
Sure.
Pat Shea. He was thinking out loud. He was running solo. He didn't have anyone with him. And it was sort of like this. He was working up to getting to the nugget and then wrapped up that part and went to the next one. And this one flowed just absolutely wonderfully. So I think it turned out great.
Just one other insight about the Pat Shea interview. So I'm interviewing Pat Shea, and as he's going through, a couple names he can't come up with. And he said, but he goes on. And finally I look to see that I'm not recording the thing.
Oh, no.
And so I say to him, well, we have a technical difficulty here. Well, let's
Go back.
Let's start over again. He says, oh, good, that way, and he had the names.
Oh my goodness. Were you on the small camera or this one?
Both of them.
Ah, okay.
Wow.
All right. Well, do you think we covered it?
I think we did. Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Excellent.
Okay.
So.
All right.
All right.
That was painless.